Hi, everybody, and welcome to the DogCo Secrets podcast. My name is Michelle Klein. I am the host, and I am also the founder of DogCo Launch, where pet care companies come to grow and scale. In today's podcast episode, I want to talk about the idea of investing in yourself and set some parameters around when I think it makes sense to invest and when I think it actually makes sense not to. I talk a lot about the idea of investment. Based off of what I do, you can probably assume correctly that I am pretty pro the idea. However, there's nuance to that, as there is to everything, and I think this is something we should get into. So let's do it. So the topic for today's podcast was actually sparked by a conversation I was having with someone in our industry this week about the nuance of investing, both in yourself and in your skills as a business owner, as well as investing in your business. And most people that I talk to are really bought in on the idea that they should invest. Like, that is a good thing. Most business owners I talk to are bought in on the idea that you have to grow your skill set. You have to, invest resources into something before you see a return. And when we're talking about investing resources, we can invest time, money, other people's time. Like, there are different forms of investment. So I do want to be clear in this episode, I would say I'm mostly speaking to financial with the talking points that I prepared, but I do think investment speaks to a broader term than just money. I actually think time investment is the most expensive form of investment that you can make. Or usually, I think that there is some form of a financial investment that tends to happen first to learn the skills to then free up your time. So it's kind of like a chicken and an egg scenario. And not always. You don't have to pay to learn skills. I prefer to do it that way because it lets me go faster. But, you can also learn by wading in and trying different things and putting in the time to learn the skill. I forget who it is that says it, but you can either get skills with time or money. Money is a quicker way to do it, usually depending on who you invest in and what you invest in. But a lot of companies that I talk to and work with struggle with the idea of what to invest in and when does it make sense to invest, which really is what I want to speak to today, because there are infinite amounts of ways that you can invest more time and money into your business. There are not infinite amounts of either of those resources to invest. So we want to be really strategic. If you're ready to take your pet care business to the next level, then I want you in the room at the DogCo Business Summit, October 2nd through the 4th in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. We have brought together the very best speakers we could possibly find, and we are getting the best companies in the room to help give you the path to grow and scale your pet care business. Go to dogcosummit.com to learn more. I have 3 situations in which I think it makes sense to consider investing, specifically speaking to money in your business and in yourself as the owner. And then I have 3 scenarios in which, if these pieces are not lined up, I would consider holding off on major investments till they are. Scenario 1, when I do think it makes sense to invest, either time or money, but especially money, this is a no-brainer to me. When you see a disproportionate and likely return for the investment. So inside of DogCo, I talk a lot about the 80-20 principle, which is the idea that not all effort and outcome are equally weighted. So there tend to be things that you have in motion that you put effort and energy into that yield a way disproportionate return to the business. Likewise, there tend to be things that cost a lot of time and energy and money and yield very little. And strategic business owners are really good and practice the skill of cutting low leverage opportunities, things that are not driving a return for them, but costing more than they bring, so they do not generate an ROI. And instead leveraging those resources into high return areas. 80-20. So if I can reallocate more resources into something that generates a bigger return, I should do that. And so I kind of like to think about business as like, you're not just planning and trying to move things forward. You're also trying to prune the things, just like a plant or a tree, that keep you from bringing that return in when you see opportunity to do so. So when something costs more to the business than it generates, we should cut that thing. Like that is not a good use of resources. However, when we see an opportunity that has the potential to return more than it costs, especially if it's significantly more, we should consider leveraging more into that investment. So, an example, if you are running paid ads, this is a pretty direct example, and they are working for you. You are returning more leads, like the value of more leads, qualified leads, than it costs you to run the ad. And especially if it's significantly more, there's an argument that you should increase that ad spend. You should invest more in that strategy. So when we have the data to prove that there is some type of disproportionate upside to the investment, tends to be a pretty good indication it's a good idea to do it, especially if you can back that with data. I know sometimes, especially when we are overwhelmed as business owners, there's a temptation to throw money at things because it's like, it's a good idea. I heard that it works for someone else. I would encourage you, we need to be more specific than that. We need to dig deeper. And especially with AI, this was true of the internet before, but especially with AI, where you can ask very specific, very contextualized questions to your business, mapping out scenarios and assessing like likelihood of return and how much it would take to get to that return. This is something you can find. So I encourage you to go do that before throwing money at something, especially if you are in a bit of a panic investment. That is something that we need to make sure that we slow down, really think about the opportunity, and take the time to get the data. Pro tip on that, if there is something that you have seen work for someone else, taking the time to reach out and just ask if they would share more about how to think about the strategy. They don't even have to tell you their secrets of how they did it. If they would just tell you how to think about it and how to know if it's working, what data and metrics you need to pay attention to in order to evaluate success, what would tell you if you're on the right way or not the right direction with the strategy, that will be so helpful just giving you that context. And side note, if they can't talk about it in those terms, you can probably assume they might not actually be seeing that much success, or maybe they are, but it's like they don't really know why. So I wouldn't put that much stock into it anyways. Okay, second reason that investing might make sense for you is when you are investing in a very specific skill set for yourself that is underdeveloped that you see an application for in the business. As an example, I worked with a coach for a very long time who focused a lot on people issues, leadership issues, accountability issues within an organization. And when I was investing with him, it was when I first had put management admin into my pet care business. I didn't know what I was doing. There was a very, very clear skill gap, and his knowledge base fit the very specific skills that I lacked in my business. So even though at the time that investment was a pretty big financial reach for me, it was a skill set that I needed to understand in order to be able to increase the overall value of my company and my own abilities as a leader. So investing in that made sense because there was a very clear skill gap and a very clear skill solution. And that can apply to anything like operations, marketing, leadership. So I wouldn't just throw money at it. I would really evaluate who or what you're considering investing in. But when it's a skill that you can like very clearly identify, in my mind, it doesn't make sense to not try to bridge that skill gap, oftentimes with a solution that you can just buy rather than going through the pain of learning it yourself with all the lessons. That is my theory. Do what feels right to you. All right, the third scenario where I feel it can make sense to invest is when something frees up your time. Now, this is one of the hardest ones I have seen for business owners to do because they immediately bring out the question, well, where would I put my time? That's the beautiful thing. We're going to figure that out. I promise you, something will captivate your time. And if you're really intentional about being high leverage with it, we'll put it to good use, but you have to free it up first. I see owners, and I do this too. I'm trying so hard to break this pattern, keep themselves so busy, keep themselves so tied up in doing things for the business that somebody else could do, that it would be a better financial decision for somebody else to do. Because I think of two reasons. Number one, they're afraid they won't know where to put their time and they will quote unquote waste it. So it feels more productive to keep it with these lower leverage opportunities. It just feels more clear and more direct. But number two, I think the deeper thing is they kind of have this question of like, well, if I'm not the one doing XYZ, whatever thing I'm doing now, who am I to the company? Where is my value to this company? And it can raise, from my experience, many existential questions on what the value is that you bring to the workplace and therefore everything and everyone all around you. That being said, still worth doing. You just need the buffer, you need the room to be able to imagine, explore, and to try new things and return higher value. So when something frees up your time, even if you do not yet see a clear-cut financial return, I think the investment is still worth making. I think this very strongly, and I am trying to lean into this more. So there's that. Okay, so those are three scenarios in which I think it makes sense to invest. I do think there are three foundational things that you need in place, usually before an investment is a good idea. Now, there are nuances and exceptions to the next three things I'm going to talk about. I'll try and nuance it as I go, but I think from a principle level, these things stand true. Number one, if you have not gotten to the place of personal financial stability, I would think carefully about financial investments specifically. You may have more success investing time than investing money. And that is just something to think about. Now, by personal stability, I do not mean things are like super comfortable, but I do mean things are stable. Like we are able to afford housing. We are able to afford food. We are able to pay utilities, the things that keep us going. I will say, I do live in a low cost of housing area, lower than most of the country. So like, please hear me. I see the privilege in that. That's why I kind of hesitated on this example. We stayed in our housing for the first 5 years of owning my pet care business, even though at about year 3, we really could have afforded to move to somewhere bigger. We could have afforded to move to somewhere that fit more of like the lifestyle things that we wanted. Now, I'm not saying that as a flex. I'm saying that as it was an intentional choice of our housing at that time, and still is compared to a lot of the country, was much more affordable than what we could have been spending in housing. That was personal stability level. Like we had secure housing. I'm not trying to turn this into a social commentary, so I hope I have not gone too far down that direction. But if you are struggling to make ends meet on personal stability things, I would recommend investing in time rather than money, unless you see a very clear 80-20 return. The further you get where money is less of an obstacle, the more you can kind of test and try different things and experiment a little bit. When we're in the place where it's like every penny has a purpose and counts, and that is so valid, we just want to be really thoughtful on maybe a time trade to learn the skill makes more sense. Maybe there's nuance to that. Okay. Number 2, second area is if we do not have any form of buffer, any form of savings. And I think the reason I want to nuance this a little bit, I can tell I'm leaning really heavily into that. There is something to be said for taking a swing. And there are seasons I look back on where I'm like, I'm kind of surprised I did that. Like that actually really was a reach and it worked out. It always works out. I do believe that. I went back and forth on adding this one, but personally do not recommend, if you can help it, living paycheck to paycheck. So again, a financial investment, if that's where we're at in our financial journey, a financial investment into something, you need to be really strategic. You need to make sure there is a clear use case for what that's going to return to you, a clear skill gap that it solves, and a lot of validation. It's a good use of that money, because I would like you to have savings. And then the third piece, especially as a business owner, is if we have gotten behind on our tax liability, I am not saying do not make financial investments. I am saying please take that very seriously. It is one thing to file an extension and get behind 1 year and get on a payment plan and handle it. It's another thing to get multiple years behind. and it starts to snowball and you have a lot of fines and it gets out of control. I think we all like to think that wouldn't happen to us. And also, like, things get really busy. It's tough. Maybe you miss a year and then you kind of start a shame spiral and it starts to feel like a really, really big project. I've seen all these things happen. And I would just say, if you are picking where money goes and you are behind on taxes, like truly behind, prioritize that, because we have to handle that situation as quickly as we can and as seriously as we can. But also, there's nuance. I'm pro investment. I invest heavily in my own education, my own skills. I always have. I will continue to do that. But I hope this episode gave you some maybe guardrails or ways to think about when it makes sense to invest and maybe when it makes sense to invest in time rather than money. So, hope this was helpful and I will catch y'all soon.